folks, just a moment. And we will be getting started very soon. Oh, damn it. Wrong button. Wrong button. It's a moment, folks, and I am starting to finish up here. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Been a while since I've actually streamed anything, you know? Okay. Hi, Ginger. So, we are going to be reading A Princess of Mars today. I'm going to pull up the stream on my phone. So I can actually see the chat. Alright. I'm going to get my copyright-free music up. There you go. 12 hours copyright-free music by The Relaxed Moment. Probably... Hey, Ava, how's it going? You guys would like to follow along? Got the website up here. Let me get that posted real quick. Oh, goddamn. Okay, I'm not messing with it. Hey, how's it going? Okay, anyway. So, this is The Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Chapter 1 on the Arizona Hills. I'm a very old man. Well, I'll turn this down a little bit. Alright, from the top. I'm a very old man. How old, I do not know. Possibly I am 100, possibly more. But I cannot tell because I have never aged as other men. Nor do I remember any childhood. So far as I can recollect, I have always been a man about 30. I appear today as I did 40 years ago and more. And more ago. Blech. And yet I feel I cannot go on living forever, that someday I shall die the real death from which there is no resurrection. I do not know why I should fear death, I who have died twice and am still alive. But yet have I the same horror of it as you who have never died. And it is because of this terror of death, I believe, that I am so convinced of my mortality. And it is because of this conviction I have determined to write down the story of interesting periods in my life and of my death. I cannot explain the phenomena. I can only set down here in the worlds of an ordinary soldier of fortune a chronicle of strange events that befell me during the 10 years that my dead body lay undiscovered in an Arizona cave. I have never told this story, nor shall mortal man see this manuscript until after I have passed over for eternity. I know that for the average human mind will not believe what it cannot grasp, and so I do not propose being pillared by the public, the pulpit, and the press, and held up as a colossal liar when I am telling but telling the truth, with the simple truths which someday science will substantiate. Possibly suggestions which I have gained upon Mars and the knowledge which I can set down in this chronicle will aid in an earlier understanding of the mysteries of our sister planet. Mysteries to you, but no longer mysteries to me. My name is John Carter. I am better known as Captain Jack Carter of Virginia. At the close of the Civil War, I found myself possessed of several $100,000 Confederate and a captain's commission of the cavalry arm of an army which no longer existed. The servant of a state which vanished with the hopes of the South. Masterless, penniless, and with my only means of livelihood, fighting, gone, I determined to work my way southwest in an attempt to retrieve my fallen fortunes and search for gold. I spent nearly a year prospecting in the company of another Confederate officer, Captain James K. Powell of Richmond. We were extremely fortunate, for late into the winter of 1865, after many hardships and privations, we located the most remarkable gold-bearing quartz vein that our wildest dreams had ever pictured. Powell, who was a mining engineer by education, said that we'd uncovered over $1 million worth of ore in a trifle over 3 months. As our equipment was crude in the extreme, we decided that one of us must return to civilization, purchase the necessary machinery, and return with a sufficient force of men to properly work the mine. As Powell was familiar with the country, as well as the mechanical requirements of mining, we decided it would be best for him to make the trip. It was agreed upon that I was to hold down our claim against the remote possibility of it being jumped by some wandering prospector. On March 3rd, 1866, Powell and I practiced provisions on two of our burros, and bidding me goodbye, he mounted his horse and started down the mountainside towards the valley, which led to the first stage of his journey. The morning of Powell's departure was, like nearly all Arizona mornings, clear and beautiful. I could see him and his little pack animals picking their way down the plateau, down the mountainside towards the valley. And during the morning, I could catch the occasional glimpses of them as they topped a hog or came back on a level plateau. My last sight of Powell was about 3 in the afternoon as he entered the shadows of a range on the opposite side of the valley. Some half hour later, I happened to glance casually across the valley and was much surprised to note 3 little dots in about the same place I had last seen my friend and his 2 pack animals. I am not given to needless worrying, but the more I tried to convince myself that all was well with Powell and the 3 dots I had seen on his trail were antelope or wild horses, the less I was able to assure myself. Since we had entered the territory, we had not seen a hostile Indian. We had therefore become careless in the extreme, and were wont to worry the stories we had heard of the greater numbers of these vicious marauders that were supposed to haunt the trails, taking their toll in lives and torture of every white party which fell into their merciless clutches. Powell, I knew, was well armed and further an experienced Indian fighter, but I too had lived and fought for years among the Sikhs of the north, and I knew that his chances were small against a party of cunning, trailing Apaches. Finally, I could endure the suspense no longer and armed myself with my 2 Colt revolvers and a carbine. I strapped 2 belts of cartridges about me and, catching my saddle horse, started down the trail taken by Powell in the morning. As soon as I reached the comparatively level ground, I urged my mount to continued this. Where the going permitted, until close upon dusk, I discovered the point where the 2 other tracks joined those of Powell. They were the tracks of unshod ponies, 3 of them, and the ponies had been galloping. I followed rapidly until darkness shutting down. I was forced to wait the rising of the moon and given an opportunity to speculate whether the wisdom of my chase. Possibly I conjured up impossible dangers, like some nervous old housewife. And when I should catch up to Powell, will get a good laugh for my pains. However, I am not prone to sensitiveness, and following a sense of duty, wherever it may lead, has always been a kind of fetish? I don't know how to pronounce that. With me throughout my life, however, which may account for the honors bestowed upon me by 3 republics and the decorations of friendship of an old and powerful emperor and several lesser kings, in whose service my sword has been read a many a time. About 9 o'clock in the afternoon, the moon was 9 o'clock. The moon was sufficiently bright for me to proceed on my way, and I had no difficulty following the trail at a fast walk. And in some places, a brisk trot until about midnight, I reached a waterhole where Powell expected the camp. I came upon the spot unexpectedly, finding it entirely deserted with no signs of having recently been occupied as a camp. I was interested to note the tracks of the pursuing horsemen, for now I was convinced they must be, continued after Powell with only a brief stop at the hole for water, always at the same rate of speed as his. I was positive now the trailers were Apaches and they wished to capture Powell alive for the fiendish pleasure of the torture. So I urged my horse at a most dangerous pace, hoping against hope I would catch up with the red rascals before they attacked him. Further speculation was cut short by the faint report of 2 shots ahead of me. I knew that Powell would need me more than ever, and I urged my horse to his topmost speed up the narrow and difficult mountain trail. I forged ahead for perhaps a mile or more without hearing further sounds, and when the trail suddenly debouched into a small open plateau near the summit of the pass. Oh, what the hell? All right, hold on. Friggin' spam callers, I tell you. All right, where was I? All right. Small plateau near the summit of the pass. I passed through a narrow overhanging gorge before entering the suddenly, upon this table of land, and the sight which met my eyes filled me with consternation and dismay. The little stretch of land was white with Indian teepees, and there were probably half a dozen red warriors clustered around some object near the center of the camp. Their attention was so wholly riveted to this point of interest, they did not notice me. I could easily turn back into the dark recesses of the gorge and made my escape with perfect safety. The fact, however, that this thought did not occur to me until the following day removes any possible right to a claim of heroism to which a narration of this episode might possibly otherwise entitle me. I do not believe I am made any of the stuff which constitutes heroes, because in the hundreds of instances that my voluntary acts have placed me face to face with death, I cannot recall a single one where any alternative step that I took occurred to me until many hours later. My mind is evidently so constituted that I am subconsciously forced upon the path of duty without recourse to tiresome mental processes. However, that may be, I have never regretted that cowardice is not optional with me. In this instant, I was of course positive that Powell was the center of the attraction, but whether I thought or acted first, I do not know. But within an instant, from the moment the scene broke upon my view, I whipped out my revolvers, and was charging down upon the entire army of warriors, shooting rapidly and whooping at the top of my lungs. Single-handedly, I could not have pursued better tactics, for the red men, convinced by the sudden surprise that not less than a regiment of regulars was upon them, turned and fled in every direction for their bows, arrows, and rifles. The view which their hurried routing disclosed filled me with apprehension and rage. Under the clear rays of the Arizona moon lay Powell, his body fairly bristling with hostile arrows of the braves. That he was already dead, I could not but be convinced, and yet I would have saved his body from mutilation at the hands of the Apaches as quickly as I would have saved the man himself from death. Riding close to him, I reached down from the saddle and, grasping his cartridge belt, drew him across the withers of my mount. A backward glance convinced me that to return the way I had come would be more hazardous than to continue across the plateau, so putting my spurs to my poor beast, I made a dash for the opening to the pass which I could distinguish on the far side of the tableland. The Indians had by this time discovered I was alone and I was pursued with imprecations, arrows, and rifle balls. The fact it is difficult to aim anything but accurately by moonlight, that they were upset by the sudden and unexpected manner of my advent, and that I was a rather rapidly moving target, saved me from the various deadly projectiles of the enemy, and permitted me to reach the shadows of surrounding peaks before an orderly pursuit could be organized. My horse was traveling practically unguided, as I knew that I probably had less knowledge of the exact location of the trail to the pass than he. And thus it happened that he entered the defile which led to the summit of the range, and not to the pass which I would hope carry me to the valley and to safety. It is probable, however, that this is the fact I owe my life and the remarkable experiences and adventures which befell me during the following 10 years. My first knowledge that I was on the wrong trail came when I heard the yells of the pursuing savages suddenly grow fainter and fainter far off to my left. I knew that they had passed to the left of the jagged rock formation at the edge of the plateau, to the right which my horse had borne me, and the body of Powell. I drew rein on a little level promontory overlooking the trail below and to my left, and saw the party of pursuing savages. disappearing around the point of a neighboring peak. I knew the Indians would soon discover they were on the wrong trail, and the search for me would be renewed in the right direction as soon as they located my tracks. I had gone but a short distance further, and what seemed to be an excellent trail opened up around the face of a high cliff. The trail was level and quite broad, and led upward and in the general direction I wished to go. The cliff arose for several hundred feet on my right, and on my left was an equal and nearly perpendicular drop to the bottom of the rocky ravine. I had followed this trail for perhaps 100 yards, when a sharp turn to the right brought me to the mouth of a large cave. The opening was about 4 feet in height and 3 to 4 feet wide, and at this opening the trail ended. It was now morning with the customary lack of dawn, which is a startling characteristic of Arizona. It had become daylight almost without warning. Dismounting, I laid Powell upon the ground, but the most painstaking examination failed to reveal the faintest spark of life. I forced water from my canteen between his dead lips, bathed his face, and rubbed his hands, working him over continuously for the better part of an hour, in the face of the fact I knew him to be dead. I was very fond of Powell. He was thoroughly a man in every respect, a polished Southern gentleman, a staunch and true friend, and it was with a feeling of the deepest grief I finally gave up my crude endeavors at resuscitation. Leaving Powell's body where it lay on the ledge, I crept into the cave to reconnoiter. I found a large chamber, possibly 100 feet in diameter and 30 or 40 feet in height, a smooth and well-worn floor, and many other evidences of the cave at some remote period being inhabited. The back of the cave was so lost in dense shadow I could not distinguish whether there were openings into other apartments or not. As I was continuing my examination, I commenced to feel a pleasant drowsiness creeping over me, which I attributed to the fatigue of my long and strenuous ride, and at the reaction from the excitement of the fight and the pursuit. I felt comparatively safe in my present location, as I knew that one man could defend the trail to the cave against an army. I soon became so drowsy that I could scarcely resist the strong desire to throw myself on the floor of the cave for a few moments' rest, but I knew this would never do, as it would mean certain death at the hands of my red friends who might be upon me at any moment. With an effort, I started towards the opening of the cave, only to reel drunkenly against the side wall, and then from there slip prone upon the floor. Okay. Well, that was... There we go. A sense of delicious dreaminess came over me. My muscles relaxed, and I was on the point of giving away my desire to sleep when the sound of approaching horses reached my ears. I attempted to spring to my feet, but was horrified to discover my muscles refused to respond to my will. I was now thoroughly awake, but unable to move a muscle, as though turned to stone. It was then, for the first time, I noticed a slight vapor filling the cave. It was extremely tenuous and only noticeable against the opening which led to daylight. There came to my nostrils a faintly pungent odor, and I could only assume I had been overcome by some poisonous gas. But why I should retain my mental faculties and yet be unable to move, I could not fathom. I lay facing the opening of the cave, and where I could see in the short stretch of trail which lay between the cave and the turn of the cliff around which the trail led. The noise of approaching horses had ceased, and I judged the Indians were creeping stealthily upon me along the little ledge which led to my living tomb. I remembered that I hoped they would make short work of me, as I did not particularly relish the thought of the innumerable things they might do to me if the spirit prompted them. I had not long to wait before a stealthy sound apprised me of their nearness, and then a war-bonnet, paint-streaked face was thrust cautiously around the shoulder of the cave, and savage eyes looked into mine. There he could see me in the dim light of the cave. I was sure, for the early morning sun was falling upon me through the opening. The fellow, instead of approaching, merely stood still and stared, his eyes bulging and his jaw dropped. And then another savage face appeared, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, craning their necks over the shoulders of their fellows, whom they could not pass upon the narrow ledge. Each face was the picture of awe and fear. But for what reason I did not know, nor did I learn until 10 years later. That there were still other braves behind those who regarded me was apparent for the fact that the leaders passed whispers back whispered word to those behind me. Suddenly, a low but distinct moaning sound issued from the recesses of the cave behind me, and it reached the ears of the Indians. They turned and fled in terror, panic-stricken. So frantic were their efforts to escape from the unseen thing behind me that one of the braves was hurled headlong from the cliff to the rocks below. Their wild cries echoed in the canyon for a short time, and then all was still once more. The sound which had frightened them was not repeated, but it had been as sufficient as to start me speculating on the possible horror which lurked in the shadows at my back. Fear is a relative term, and and so I can only measure my feelings at the time by what I experienced in previous positions of danger and by those I have passed through since. But I can say without shame that if the sensations I endured for the next few minutes were fear, then may God help the coward. For cowardice is surely a punishment of its own. To be held paralyzed with one's back towards some horrible and unknown danger, from the very sound of which the ferocious Apache warriors turn in wild stampede, as a flock of sheep would madly flee from a pack of wolves, seems to me the last word in fearsome predicaments for a man who had ever been used to fighting for his life with all the energy of a powerful physique. Several times I thought I had heard the faint sounds behind me of somebody moving cautiously, but eventually these ceased, and I was left to contemplation of my own position without interruption. I could vaguely conjecture the cause of my paralysis, and my only hope lay that it might pass off as suddenly as it had fallen me. Late in the afternoon, my horse, which had been standing with the dragging rein before the cave, slowly started down the trail, evident in search of food and water, and I was left alone with my mysterious unknown companion, the dead body of my friend, which lay just within my range of vision upon the ledge where I had placed it in the early morning. From then until possibly midnight, all was silence, the silence of the dead, and then suddenly, the awful moan of the morning broke upon my startled ears, and there came again from the black shadows the sound of a moving thing and a faint rustling as of dead leaves. The shock to my already strained nervous system was terrible in the extreme, and with superhuman effort I strove to break my awful bonds. It was an effort of the mind, of the will, of the nerves, not the muscular, for I could not move even so much as my little finger, but nonetheless mighty for all that. Then something gave, like there was a momentary feeling. Momentary feeling of nausea, a sharp click as of the snapping of a steel wire, and I stood with my back against the wall of the cave facing my unknown foe. And then the moonlight flooded the cave, and there before me lay my own body, as it had been lying down all these hours, with the eyes staring towards the open ledge, and the hands resting limply upon the ground. I looked first at my lifeless clay upon the floor of the cave, and then down at myself in utter bewilderment. For there I lay clothed, and yet here I stood but naked as the first minute of my birth. The transition had been so sudden, so unexpected, that it left me for a moment forgetful of aught else but than my strange metamorphosis. My first thought was, is this then death? Have I indeed passed over forever into that other life? But I could not believe this as well, as I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs from the exertion of my efforts to release myself from the anesthesis which held me. My breath was coming in quick, short gasps. Cold sweat stood out from every pore of my body, and the ancient experiment of pinching revealed that I was anything other than a wraith. Again, I was suddenly recalled to my immediate surroundings by a repetition of the weird moan from the depths of the cave. Naked and unarmed as I was, I had no desire to face the unseen thing which menaced me. My revolvers were strapped to my lifeless body, which for some unfathomable reason I could not bring myself to touch. My carbine was in its boot, strapped to my saddle. As my horse had wandered off, I was left without a means of defense. My only alternative seemed to lie in flight, and my decision was crystallized by a recurrence of the rustling sound from which the thing now seemed, in the darkness of the cave, into my distorted imagination, to be creeping stealthily upon me. Unable to resist the temptation to escape this horrible place, I leapt quickly through the opening of a starlight into the starlight of a clear Arizona night. The crisp, fresh mountain air outside of the cave acted as immediate tonic, and I felt new life and new courage coursing through me. Pausing upon the brink of the ledge, I upbraided myself for what seemed to be my wholly unwarranted apprehension. I reasoned with myself that I had lain helpless for many hours within the cave, and yet nothing had molested me, and my better judgment, which permitted me the direction of clear and logical reasoning, convinced me the noises I heard must have resulted from some purely natural and harmless causes. Oh, damn it, I lost my... Probably from the conformation of the cave, which such a slight breeze had caused the sounds I heard. I decided to investigate, but first I lifted my head to fill my lungs with the pure, invigorating night air of the mountains. And as I did, I saw stretching far below me the beautiful vista of a rocky gorge and level, cacti-studded flat, which wrought moonlight into a miracle of soft splendor and wondrous enchantment. Few Western wonders are more inspiring than the beauties of an Arizona moonlit landscape. The silvered mountains in the distance, the strange lights and shadows upon hogback and arroyo, and the grotesque details of the stiff yet beautiful cacti, they painted form a picture at once enchanting and inspiring. As though one were catching for the first time a glimpse of some dead and forgotten world, so different as it is from the aspect of any other spot upon our earth. As I stood meditating, I turned my gaze from the landscape to the heavens, where a myriad of stars formed a gorgeous and fitting canopy for the wonders of the earthly scene. My attention was quickly riveted by a large red star close to the distant horizon. As I gazed upon it, I felt a spell of overpowering fascination. It was Mars, the god of war, and for me, the fighting man, it had always held the power of an irresistible enchantment. As I gazed upon that far-gone night, it seemed to call across the unthinkable void, to lure me to it, to draw me as the lodestone attracts a particle of iron. My longing was beyond the power of opposition. I closed my eyes, stretched out my arms towards the god of my vocation, and felt myself drawn with the suddenness of thought, to the trackless immensity of space. There was an instant of extreme cold and utter darkness. Ow. Okay. Now, last chapter. I opened my eyes upon a strange and weird landscape. I knew that I was on Mars, not once did I question either my sanity or my wakefulness. I was not asleep, no need for pinching here. My inner consciousness told me plainly that I was upon Mars as your conscience tells you that you were upon Earth. You do not question the fact, neither did I. I found myself lying prone upon a bed of yellowish, moss-like vegetation, which stretched around me in all directions for interminable miles. I seemed to be lying across on a deep circular basin along the outer verge, which I could distinguish the irregularities of low hills. It was midday, the sun was shining full upon me, and the heat was rather intense upon my naked body, yet no greater than would have been true upon similar conditions on an Arizona desert. Here and there were slight outcroppings of quartz-bearing rock. Fucking hey. Damn punk. Okay. It was quartz-bearing rock which glistened in the sunlight, and a little to my left, perhaps 100 yards, appeared a low walled enclosure about 4 feet in height. No water and no other vegetation other than the moss was in evidence. And as I was somewhat thirsty, I determined to do a little exploring. Springing to my feet, I received my first Martian supplies for the effort, which on Earth, which had brought me standing upright, carried me into the Martian air to the height of about 3 yards. I alighted softly upon the ground, however, without the appreciable shock or jar. Now commenced a series of evolutions which even then seemed ludicrous to the extreme. I found that I must learn to walk all over again, as the muscular exertion which carried me easily and safely upon Earth played strange antics with me upon Mars. Instead of progressing in a sane, dignified manner, my attempts to walk resulted in a variety of hops which took me clear off the ground a couple of feet at each step and landed me sprawling upon my face or back at the end of each second or third loop. My muscles, perfectly attuned and accustomed to the force of gravity on Earth, played mischief with me in attempting to first cope with the lesser gravitation and lower air pressure on Mars. I was determined, however, to explore the low structure which was the only evidence of habitation in sight. And so I hit upon the unique plan of reverting to first principles in local motion, creeping. I did fairly well at this, and in a few moments had reached the low encircling wall of the enclosure. There seemed to be no doors or windows upon the side to me, but as the wall was about 4 feet high, I cautiously gained my feet and peered over the top. Upon the strangest sight it had ever given me to see. The roof of the enclosure was of solid glass, about 4 or 5 inches in thickness, and beneath were several hundred large eggs, perfectly round and in the snowy white. The eggs were near uniform in size, being about 2 1/2 feet in diameter. 5 or 6 had already hatched, and the grotesque characters which sat blinking in the sunlight were enough to cause me to doubt my sanity. They seemed mostly head, with little scrawny bodies, long necks, and 6 legs, and after I learned, 2 legs and 2 arms. with an intermediary pair of limbs which could be used at will as either arms or legs. Their eyes were set to the extreme size of their heads, a trifle above the center, and protruded in a manner that could be directed either forward or back, and also independently of each other, thus permitting this queer animal to look in any direction, or in two directions at once, without the necessity of turning the head. The ears, which were slightly above the eyes and closed together, were small cup-shaped antennae protruding not more than an inch on these young specimens. Their noses were long, longitudinal slits in the center of their faces, midway between their mouths and ears. There were no hair on their bodies, which were of a very bright, light yellowish-green color. In the adults, as I was to learn quite soon, this color deepens to an olive green and is darker in the male than it is the female. Further, the heads of the adults are not so out of proportion to their bodies as is the case of the young. The irises of its eyes were blood red as in albinos, while the pupil is dark. Their eyeball itself is very white, as are the teeth. These latter add a most ferocious appearance to an otherwise fearsome and terrible countenance, as lower tusks curve upward to sharp points which end about where the eyes of earthly human beings are located. The whiteness of the teeth is not that of ivory, but the snowiest and most gleaming of china. Against the dark background of their olive skins, their tusks stand out in the most striking manner, making these weapons present a singularly formidable appearance. Most of these details I noted, for I was given little time to speculate upon the wonders of my discovery. I had seen the eggs were in the process of hatching, and as I stood watching the hideous little monsters break from their shells, I failed to note the approach of a score of full-grown Martians from behind me, coming as they did over the soft and soundless ground which practically covers the entire surface of Mars, with the exception of the frozen areas at the poles and the scattered cultivated districts. They might have captured me easily, but their intentions were far more sinister. It was the rattling of the counterments of the foremost warriors which warned me. On such a thing my life hung, that I often marvel I escaped so easily. Had the rifle of the leader of the party swung from its fastenings beside his saddle in such a way as to strike against the butt of his greater metal-shod spur, I should have snuffed out without ever knowing that death was near me. But the little sound caused me to turn, and there, not 10 feet from my breast, was the point of that of a huge spear, a spear 40 feet long, tipped with gleaming metal and held low at the side of a replica of the little devils I'd been watching. How puny and harmless they looked now beside this huge and terrific incarnation of hate, of vengeance and death. The man himself, which I may call him, was fully 15 feet in height, and on Earth would have weighed some 400 pounds. He sat in his mount as we sit on a horse, grasping the animal's barrow with his lower limbs, while the hands of his two arms held his immense spear low at the side of his mount. His two left arms were outstretched laterally to help preserve his balance. The thing he rode neither had bridle or reins or any description for guidance. And his mount, how can earthly words describe it? It towered 10 feet from the shoulder, had 4 legs on either side, a broad flap tail larger than the tip of the root, which it held straight out from behind when running, a gaping mouth which split its head from its snout to its long, massive bent neck. Like its master, it was entirely devoid of hair, but it was a dark slate color and exceedingly smooth and glossy. Its belly was white, and its legs shaded from the slate of its shoulders, and its hips to a vivid yellow at the feet. The feet themselves were heavily padded and nailless, which in fact had also contributed to the noiselessness of their approach, and in common with a multiplicity of legs, is a characteristic feature of the fauna of Mars. The highest type of man and one other animal, the only mammal existing on Mars, alone having well-formed nails, and there is absolutely no hoofed animals in existence there. Behind this first charging demon trailed 19 others, all similar in all respects, but as I later learned, bearing individual characteristics peculiar to themselves, precisely as no two of us are identical, although we are all cast in a similar mold. This picture, or rather materialized nightmare, which I have described at length, made but one terrible and swift impression as I turned to meet it. Unarmed and naked as I was, I saw the first law of nature manifested itself in the only possible solution of my immediate problem, and that was to get out of the vicinity of the charging spear. Consequently, I gave a very earthly and at the same time superhuman leap to reach the top of the Martian incubator. for I determined it must be. My effort was crowned with success, which appalled me no less than it seemed to surprise the Martian warriors, for it carried me fully 30 feet into the air and landed me 100 feet from my pursuers and on the opposite side of the enclosure. I alighted with the soft moss easily and without mishap. Turning and saw all my enemies lined up along the further wall. Some were surveying me with expressions which I had discovered marked extreme astonishment, while others were evidently satisfying themselves that I had not molested their young. They were conversing together in low tones and gesticulating and pointing towards me. Their discovery that I had not harmed the little Martians and that I was unarmed must have caused them to look upon me with less ferocity, but as I was to learn later, the thing that weighed most in my favor was the expedition of my hurtling. While the Martians are immense, their bones are very large, and they are muscled only in proportion to the gravitation which they must overcome. The result is that they are infinitely less agile and less powerful in proportion to their weight than an Earthman, and I doubt that if one of them were suddenly to be transported to Earth, he could lift his own weight from the ground. In fact, I am convinced he could not do so. My feat was then as marvelous upon Mars as it would have been upon Earth, and from the desiring to annihilate me, they suddenly looked upon me as a wonderful discovery to be captured and exhibited among their fellows. The respite my unexpected agility had given me had permitted me to formulate plans for the immediate future, and to note more closely the appearance of the warriors, for I could not disassociate these people from the mind of those other warriors who, only the day before, had been pursuing me. I know that each one was armed with several other weapons in addition to the huge spear which I have described. Their weapon, which caused me to decide against an attempt at escape or flight, was evidently a rifle of some description, in which I felt, for some reason, they were peculiarly, efficient in handling. These rifles were of a white metal stocked with wood, which I later learned was of a very light and intensely hard growth much prized on Mars, and entirely unknown to us denizens of Earth. The metal of the barrel is an alloy composed principally of aluminum and steel, which they have learned to temper to a hardness far exceeding that of steel with which ye are familiar. The weight of these rifles is comparatively little, and with the small caliber, explosive radium projectiles which they use in the great length of the barrel, they are deadly in the extreme and at ranges which would be unthinkable on Earth. The theoretic radius of this rifle is 300 miles, but the best they can do in actual service when equipped with their wireless finders and sighters is but a trifle over 200 miles. This is quite enough to imbue me with great respect for the Martian firearm, and some telepathic force must have warned me against an escape attempt in broad daylight under the muzzles of 20 of these death-dealing machines. The Martians, after conversing for a short time, turned and rode away in the direction which they had come, leaving one of their number alone by the enclosure. When they had perhaps covered 200 yards, they halted, turning their mounts, sat watching the warrior by the enclosure. He was the one whose spear had nearly so transfixed me and was evidently the leader of the band. As I noted, they seemed to have moved their present position in his direction. When his force had come to a halt, he dismounted, threw down his spear with small arms, and came around to the incubator towards me, entirely unarmed and naked as I, except for the ornament strapped to his head, limb, and breast. When he was at about 50 feet of me, he unclasped an enormous metal armlet and held it towards me in the open palm of his hand, addressed me in a clear, resonant voice, but in a language that is needless to say I could not understand. He then stopped, waiting for my reply, picking up his antenna-like ears and cocking his strange eyes, still looking further towards me. As the silence became painful, I continued to hazard a little conversation on my own part, as I guess he was making the overtures of Pierce. The throwing down of his weapons and withdrawing of his troop before his advance towards me would have signified a peaceful mission anywhere on Earth, so why not then on Mars? Placing my hand over my heart, I bowed low to the Martian and explained to him why I did not understand the language. His actions spoke of peace and friendship at the present moment were most dear to my heart. Of course, I might have been a babbling brook for all the intelligence my speech carried to him, but he understood the action, which I immediately followed with my words. Stretching my hand towards him, I advanced and took the armlet from his open palm, clasping it about my arm above the elbow, smiled at him, stood waiting. His mouth spread wide into an answering smile, and locking one of his intermediary arms in mine, we turned and walked back to his mount. At the same time, he motioned his followers to advance. They started towards us on a wild run, but were checked by a signal from him. Evidently, he feared that if I were to be really frightened, I might jump entirely out of the landscape. He exchanged a few words to his men, motioned me that I would ride behind one of them, and then mounted his own animal. The fellow designated reached 2 or 3 hands and lifted me up behind him on the glossy back of his mount, where I hung on as best I could to the belts and stretched which held the Martian's weapons and ornament. The entire cavalcade cavalcade turned and galloped away towards the range of hills in the distance. All right. Well, that's enough of me making a fool of myself for now. Ugh. Okay, well, first 3 chapters down, and how many are there total? Let's see, 3. And 28. Cool. So we got 25 chapters left. Yep, story time for the win. That's the first time I've actually ever read anything like that aloud. Kind of stumbled over a few words. I'm sure I'll get better as I go. Anyways, appreciate you all stopping by. And I will see you all maybe tomorrow afternoon. I don't know. See you later.